The sun cast long, blood-orange shadows across the barren Wyoming plain as Clayton Barker shoveled the last of the rocky earth onto the fresh grave. His weathered hands gripped the wooden handle of the spade, knuckles white with grief and exhaustion. 3 days of watching consumption steal the breath from Alina's lungs had hollowed him out more thoroughly than the 6 months of drought had ravaged his cattle ranch outside Laramie. Clayton planted the shovel in the dirt and removed his hat, letting the morning breeze ruffle his sweat-dampened hair. At 36, he suddenly felt ancient. The simple wooden cross bearing Alina's name stood stark against the dawning sky, the only marker of the woman who'd shared his bed, his dreams, and his struggles for nearly a decade. Should have said proper words, he muttered to the silence. But no words would come, not at the bedside when she'd slipped away, not when he'd wrapped her in their wedding quilt, and not now as dawn broke over her grave. Clayton had never been a man of many words, but Alina had understood his silences. Now there was no one left to understand. He replaced his hat and turned toward the small clapboard house he'd built with his own hands when they'd first claimed this patch of Wyoming territory back in 1871. 10 years of memories lived in those walls. 10 years of Alina's laughter, her determination, her gentle touch on nights when the nightmares of the war came to haunt him. Clayton hadn't shed a tear since Gettysburg, but as he walked away from the fresh mound of earth, moisture burned at the corners of his eyes. He blinked it away, fixing his gaze on the horizon. There were cattle to tend, water to haul, fence lines to mend. The work wouldn't stop because Alina had, inside the cabin, he splashed water on his face from the basin, noting the stillness. No coffee brewing on the stove. No humming as Alina worked at her loom. Just the hollow echo of emptiness that seemed to pulse with each beat of his heart. Clayton had just pulled on his work gloves when the sound of wagon wheels caught his attention. Visitors were rare out this way, especially at dawn. The nearest neighbor, old Pete Williams, lived 5 miles down the valley, and town was a half-day's ride. Moving to the window, Clayton squinted against the rising sun. A covered wagon was approaching slowly along the rutted path that served as a road. The driver was hunched forward, reins held in gloved hands. Something about the way the wagon moved cautious, hesitant told Clayton this wasn't a familiar visitor. With practiced movements, he reached for his Winchester and stepped onto the porch. The wagon drew closer, and Clayton could make out more details. The canvas cover was weathered and patched in places. The team of horses looked tired but well cared for. And the driver was a woman. She pulled back on the reins as she approached the yard, bringing the wagon to a stop a respectful distance from the house. Clayton kept his rifle lowered but ready as he watched her set the brake. "Hello there," she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Might I trouble you for some water for my horses?" Clayton didn't answer immediately. The woman appeared to be in her late 20s or early 30s, wearing a plain dark dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. Something stirred behind her in the wagon movement that caught Clayton's eye. A small face peered out from beneath the canvas. Then another, and another. Children. The woman had children with her. "There's a pump by the barn," Clayton finally replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Help yourself." "Thank you kindly." The woman climbed down from the wagon seat with practiced ease, revealing a slender frame. As she turned to assist one of the children down, Clayton caught a better look at her face, fine-boned features weathered by sun and wind, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and eyes the color of a summer storm. The children emerged from the wagon one by one, ranging from what looked like 4 or 5 years to perhaps 12. 6 of them in total, Clayton counted with surprise. All appeared travel-worn but well-behaved as they stretched their legs while staying close to the wagon. "Children, mind your manners while I see to the horses," the woman instructed. She reached back into the wagon and retrieved a bucket before heading toward the barn. Clayton remained on the porch, unsure what to do with these unexpected visitors. As the woman filled the bucket at the pump, the oldest child, a girl with her mother's stormy eyes, approached the porch steps. "Sir," she said, her voice small but steady, "Ma asked me to give you this." From her apron pocket, she produced a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "It's soup, sir. Ma made it last night, said to thank you for the water." Clayton hesitated before taking the offering, the cloth still warm in his hands. "Soup," the girl nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, rabbit soup, best you'll ever taste." Before Clayton could respond, the woman returned, settling the water bucket for her horses. "Abigail, don't be bothering the gentleman," she called. "No bother," Clayton found himself saying. He looked down at the bundle in his hands, then back at the woman and her brood of children. "Where you headed?" "Denver," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "My brother has a place there. Wrote that he could use some help with his mercantile." Clayton nodded. Denver was still a good 4 days' journey, assuming good weather and no troubles. Long way yet. "Yes," she agreed, her gaze drifting to the fresh grave on the hillside. Something in her expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." Clayton stiffened, surprised by her perception and the sudden ache her words brought. "My wife," he said after a moment, 3 days ago, consumption." The woman nodded, no empty platitudes crossing her lips. "I lost my husband last winter. Fever took him quick." Their eyes met across the yard, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Then one of the younger children tugged at her skirt, breaking the connection. "Ma, I'm hungry," the small boy whispered, though his voice carried in the still morning air. "Soon, Daniel," she assured him, then turned back to Clayton. "We should be on our way. Thank you for the water." Clayton found himself unwilling to see them leave so quickly. "You've been traveling through the night?" "Yes," she admitted. "Wanted to make good time while the weather holds." Clayton gestured to the bundle in his hands. "Seems only fair you share this with me since you provided it. Got coffee inside, too." The woman hesitated, studying his face as if searching for something. Whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she gave a small nod. "That's kind of you, Mr. Barker. Clayton Barker. Amelia Everett," she replied. "And these are my children. Well, some are mine by birth, others by circumstance." As she began introducing the children, Abigail, 12, Thomas, 10, Sarah, 8, Daniel and David, 6-year-old twins, and little Lily, just 4, Clayton found himself wondering at their story. 3 of the children, Abigail, Thomas, and Sarah, had Amelia's dark hair and gray eyes, while the others bore different features. "Come on in then," he said, holding the door open. "It ain't much, but it's shelter." The children filed in quietly, their eyes wide as they took in the simple cabin. Clayton was suddenly conscious of the sparse furnishings, the table with its 4 mismatched chairs, the small cookstove, Eleanor's loom in the corner gathering dust. He'd never noticed how shabby it all looked until seeing it through the eyes of these strangers. Amelia seemed to sense his discomfort. "Children, find seats where you can. Mind your manners." She turned to Clayton. "If you'll allow me to use your stove, I can heat the soup properly." Clayton nodded, grateful for her taking charge. While Amelia bustled about, finding the pot and getting the soup ready, the children settled themselves, the older ones on the chairs, the younger ones cross-legged on the plank floor. "You've come far?" Clayton asked as he set about making coffee. "From Nebraska Territory," Amelia replied. "Our farm went under after John, my husband, passed. Couldn't manage alone, not with the children to care for." Clayton nodded. He understood that predicament all too well. Even before Alina fell ill, the ranch had been a struggle to maintain. Now, with her gone, and the other children, he asked quietly, nodding toward the three who didn't share Amelia's features. Amelia's hands paused in their work. The Wilsons were our neighbors. When cholera took them both last spring, there was no one else to take the little ones. Couldn't bear to see them separated and sent to an orphanage. Clayton felt a sudden surge of respect for this woman who had taken on the responsibility of 3 more mouths to feed when she could barely sustain her own. "That's quite a burden you've shouldered," he observed. Amelia's chin lifted slightly. "They're not a burden, Mr. Barker. They're children who needed someone, just as mine would if something happened to me." Clayton nodded, properly chastened. "Didn't mean it that way, Mrs. Everett." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "I know, and I didn't mean to sound sharp. It's been a long journey." As they shared the simple meal, the rabbit soup was indeed flavorful, made better with dried herbs and what looked like the last of her vegetables. Clayton found himself studying Amelia Everett. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that reminded him of Alina. But where Alina had been soft-spoken and gentle, Amelia had an edge to her, a determined set to her jaw that spoke of hard choices and harder times. "How are your provisions?" Clayton asked as the meal wound down. Amelia's hesitation told him everything. "We'll manage," she finally said. Clayton rose and went to the pantry. He gathered flour, salt, coffee, and the last of the dried venison. "Take these," he said, placing them on the table. "Got plenty." It was a lie, and from the look in Amelia's eyes she knew it, but she accepted the offerings with dignity. "Thank you, Mr. Barker. We'll make good use of them." As they prepared to leave, Clayton found himself reluctant to see them go. The cabin would be empty again, filled only with ghosts and silence. "Storm's brewing," he said, gesturing to the western horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Might be best to wait it out. Got a lean-to behind the barn where you could shelter the wagon." Amelia followed his gaze, assessing the distant clouds with practiced eyes. "You may be right," she conceded. "If you're certain we wouldn't be imposing." Clayton shrugged. "Company's no imposition." And so it was decided. Clayton helped Amelia move the wagon to the sheltered area behind the barn, while the children explored the ranch yard with the boundless energy of youth. The oldest girl, Abigail, took it upon herself to mind the younger ones, displaying a maturity beyond her years that spoke volumes about the responsibilities she'd already shouldered in her young life. As Clayton worked alongside Amelia, securing the wagon and unhitching the horses, he found himself curious about this woman who had appeared like an apparition on the morning he'd buried his wife. "Your brother in Denver," he began. "He know you're coming." Amelia nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sent word ahead. Samuel's a good man, widowed himself. Says Denver's growing fast and he could use the help in his store, and the children will have opportunities there they wouldn't have had back home." "Long journey to make alone with 6 young ones," Clayton observed. A shadow crossed Amelia's face. "We weren't alone when we started. John's brother William was traveling with us, but he—" She paused. "2 days ago, he decided to try his luck in the gold fields up north. Said he'd catch up with us in Denver, but I don't expect to see him again." Clayton's estimation of her brother-in-law sank rapidly. "Left you to fend for yourselves. William was never one for responsibility," Amelia said diplomatically, though her tone carried an edge. "And I'm no stranger to managing on my own." Before Clayton could respond, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly intensifying into a steady downpour. "Inside," he called to the children, who scurried toward the cabin with shrieks of excitement. As they all huddled in the small cabin, the rain drumming on the roof, Clayton felt the house come alive in a way it hadn't since Alina first fell ill months ago. The children's presence, their whispered conversations, occasional giggles, and even their squabbles filled the empty spaces. Amelia organized the children efficiently, having them help prepare a simple supper from their combined provisions. Clayton contributed some potatoes from his root cellar, and soon a hearty stew was simmering on the stove. "You're good with them," Clayton observed as Amelia gently settled a dispute between the twins over who would set the table. "Necessity is a thorough teacher," she replied with a small smile. "And they're good children, despite everything they've been through." As they ate, the children gradually warmed to Clayton, their initial shyness giving way to curiosity. Little Lily, the youngest, seemed particularly fascinated by his beard, staring at him with wide eyes from across the table. "Does your face get hot with all that fur?" she finally asked, causing her siblings to dissolve into giggles. "Lily," Amelia admonished, but Clayton found himself chuckling. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but keeps me warm in winter. My pa had a beard," Daniel offered solemnly, "but not as big as yours." An awkward silence fell, but Clayton handled it with unexpected grace. "Well, beards are serious business. Takes commitment." This sent the children into another round of giggles, the momentary tension broken. After supper, with the rain still falling steadily, Clayton brought out a deck of playing cards. He taught the older children how to play a simple game while Amelia told stories to the younger ones, her voice soft and expressive as she recounted tales that had clearly become favorites. As night fell, sleeping arrangements were negotiated. The children would take the main room, the girls on Clayton's bed, the boys on pallets made from blankets Amelia had brought from the wagon. Clayton insisted Amelia take Alina's rocking chair, the most comfortable seat in the house, while he would sleep in the barn to give them privacy. "That's not necessary," Amelia protested. "We've already imposed enough." "No imposition," Clayton insisted. "Got a decent bedroll out there. Used to sleep in worse during the war." A look of understanding crossed Amelia's face. "Which side?" she asked quietly after ensuring the children weren't listening. "Union. Illinois 82nd, he replied. "You had people in it, my father and older brother, both with the Nebraska Volunteers." She paused. "We lost my brother at Shiloh." Clayton nodded solemnly. "Sorry to hear it. Lost too many good men in that war." Their eyes met in silent acknowledgement of shared losses, creating a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Later, as Clayton prepared to head to the barn, Amelia stopped him at the door. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your kindness today." "Least I could do," he replied. "Alina would have done the same." Amelia's gaze was steady. She must have been a good woman. "The best," Clayton agreed, his throat tightening. "Good night, Mr. Barker." "Clayton," he corrected. "Just Clayton is fine." A small smile curved her lips. "Good night, Clayton." "Good night, Mrs. Everett." "Amelia," she replied. "Just Amelia is fine." In the barn, listening to the rain on the roof, Clayton found himself more at peace than he'd expected to be on this day of all days. Alina's absence still ached like a physical wound, but the presence of Amelia and her children had somehow made it bearable, if only for a few hours. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, the rain occasionally giving way to thunderous downpours that turned the yard into a sea of mud. By unspoken agreement, Amelia and her children remained at the ranch, their planned departure delayed by the weather. Clayton found himself falling into an easy rhythm with them. He showed the older boys how to care for the horses and milk the cow, while Amelia and Abigail tackled the domestic tasks that had gone neglected since Alina's illness. The younger children trailed after Clayton like ducklings, fascinated by his every movement and peppering him with endless questions that he answered with surprising patience. "You ever shot a real Indian?" David asked with the direct curiosity only a 6-year-old could muster. David, Amelia exclaimed, horrified. That's not an appropriate question. Clayton shook his head. No, I haven't, and hope I never have to. The Arapaho and Cheyenne in these parts have had enough trouble without adding to it. But I thought cowboys and Indians were enemies, Thomas chimed in, clearly confused. Some are, Clayton conceded. But most folks just want to live in peace, Indian or white, and I'm not rightly a cowboy, I'm a rancher. What's the difference? Sarah wanted to know. Well, Clayton said thoughtfully, a cowboy works for wages driving other men's cattle. A rancher owns the land and the livestock. The children considered this distinction with serious expressions. I think I'd rather be a cowboy, Daniel decided. More exciting, Clayton chuckled. Might seem that way, but there's plenty of excitement in ranching too. Like when a mountain lion gets into your chicken coop, or when you're bringing in the herd during a storm. As the days passed, Clayton found himself sharing more and more stories with the children, tales of his early days in the territory, of building the ranch from nothing, of the characters he'd encountered in his travels. He surprised himself with his own talkativeness. He'd never been one for long conversations, but the children's eager attention drew him out. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Clayton and Amelia would sit by the fire, talking in low voices. She told him about her life in Nebraska, about her husband John, who'd been a schoolteacher before turning to farming, about her dreams for her children's future in Denver. Samuel says the city's growing fast, she explained on the third night. Schools, churches, proper streets. Children need civilization, especially if they are to have chances we didn't. Clayton nodded, though a part of him rebelled at the idea of towns and civilization. He'd come west precisely to escape those things after the war. And you, he asked, what do you need? Amelia looked startled by the question, as if no one had bothered to ask in a very long time. Safety, she finally said. Security for the children. A chance to build something lasting. And for yourself, Clayton pressed. Just those things? Amelia stared into the fire. I stopped thinking about just myself the day Abigail was born, she admitted. But if I could wish for one thing. She paused. Partnership, not to carry everything alone. The honesty of her answer struck Clayton deeply. How many times had Alina said similar words when the burden of the ranch threatened to overwhelm them? How often had her presence beside him made impossible tasks manageable? Your brother-in-law should never have left you, Clayton said, his voice low with disapproval. A sad smile touched Amelia's lips. William was never suited to responsibility. John knew it tried to shield him from it their whole lives. I can't truly blame him for returning to the only freedom he's ever known. Still wasn't right, Clayton insisted. No, Amelia agreed. But we manage with what we're given, not what we deserve. On the fourth day, the rain finally ceased, and the sun emerged to begin drying the sodden landscape. Clayton knew their departure was imminent and found himself increasingly troubled by the thought. The past few days had been a reprieve from grief, a reminder that life continued even when it seemed impossible. That afternoon, he made a decision. Waiting until the children were occupied, he approached Amelia as she hung freshly laundered clothes on the line behind the cabin. Been thinking, he began without preamble. Denver's still a long journey. Roads'll be bad after all this rain. Amelia nodded, pinning one of David's shirts to the line. I know, but we've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Not an imposition, Clayton insisted. Actually had a proposition for you. Amelia turned to face him fully, a wary curiosity in her eyes. Ranch is too much for one man, Clayton continued. Always was, even before Alina took sick. Been thinking of taking on help for some time. Are you offering me employment, Mr. Barker? Amelia asked, her tone carefully neutral. Clayton, he corrected automatically. And not exactly. More of an arrangement. You and the children stay on through winter. Help with the place. Come spring, if you still want Denver, I'll see you there myself. If not. He shrugged. Place needs a woman's touch. Children seem to like it here. Amelia studied him for a long moment. That's a generous offer, but I've learned to be cautious about accepting generosity from men I barely know. Clayton nodded, respecting her wariness. Not asking anything improper. You'd have the house. I can fix up the old line shack for myself. Just practical sense is all. And what would be expected of me in this arrangement? Amelia asked directly. Same as you've been doing. Cooking, keeping house, helping with lighter ranch work when needed. Children old enough can help too, as they've been doing. And in return, roof over your heads, food on the table. Small wage I can set aside for your journey if you decide to go in spring. Clayton hesitated. And my word that you'll be treated with respect. No funny business. Amelia's expression softened slightly. I believe you're an honorable man, Clayton, but this is a decision that affects all of us. I need to speak with the children. Course, Clayton agreed. Take your time. That evening, Amelia gathered her children in the main room while Clayton made himself scarce, busying himself with chores in the barn. When he returned an hour later, she was waiting on the porch. We've talked it through, she said as he approached. The children are enthusiastic about staying. Particularly the boys. They've taken a shine to you and the ranch. Clayton felt a surprising surge of pleasure at this news. And you? What do you think? Amelia's gaze was steady. I think it's a practical solution to immediate problems for both of us. But I want to be clear, this is a temporary arrangement. The children need stability, education, opportunities. Denver still offers those things. Understood, Clayton nodded. Come spring, if that's still what you want, I'll honor it. Then we accept your offer, Amelia said, extending her hand as if to seal a business deal. Clayton took it, noting the strength in her grip despite her slender fingers. Good, he said simply. Good. The following days saw a flurry of activity as the ranch adjusted to its new inhabitants. Clayton made good on his promise to move into the line shack, a small but sturdy cabin about 100 yards from the main house that had originally been built for ranch hands. He repaired its roof, patched the walls, and made it comfortable enough, though the solitude after days of constant company felt strange. Amelia and the children settled into the main house, their few possessions quickly absorbed into the fabric of the place. The children, delighted by the permanence of their situation, explored every inch of the ranch with unbridled enthusiasm. Even Abigail, the most reserved of the group, began to show interest in Alina's abandoned loom after Amelia explained the basics of weaving. October gave way to November, and the rhythms of ranch life established themselves. Clayton found himself rising each morning with a sense of purpose that had been missing since Alina's death. There were cattle to tend, repairs to make before winter set in fully, hunting to supplement their food stores, and countless other tasks that seemed less daunting with Amelia's efficient help and the children's eager assistance. Thomas and Abigail proved particularly helpful, Thomas taking to ranch work with natural aptitude, Abigail becoming Amelia's right hand in managing the household. The twins, Daniel and David, were assigned simpler chores like gathering eggs and feeding the chickens, while Sarah helped with cooking and watched over little Lily. Clayton observed the family's dynamics with growing admiration. Amelia ran a tight ship, expecting obedience and contribution from each child according to their abilities, but her methods were kind and her patience remarkable. She never raised her voice, even when the twins got into mischief or Lily threw one of her rare tantrums. "You have a way with them," Clayton commented one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the Wyoming sky. Amelia smiled faintly. "John was the natural parent. I've had to learn, still learning if I'm honest." "Seem to be doing just fine," Clayton assured her. "Better than fine." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. "Tell me about a leaner," Amelia said suddenly, "if it's not too painful to speak of her." Clayton stared into the darkness, considering. In the weeks since the burial, he'd barely spoken Alina's name aloud. Yet now, with Amelia's gentle prompting, he found he wanted to. "Met her in Chicago after the war," he began. "I was different then. Angry, drinking too much, nightmares that wouldn't quit. She was working in her father's bookshop." A smile tugged at his lips at the memory. "Used to go in just to look at her. Pretended to be interested in books I couldn't even read properly." "She saw through you," Amelia guessed. "Right away," Clayton confirmed. "Called me on it too. Said if I was going to loiter in their shop, I might as well learn something. Started teaching me to read better. One thing led to another. She sounds remarkable." She was. Gentle soul but strong in her way. Followed me out here when most city women would have balked. Learned to live rough, to handle everything the territory threw at us." Clayton's voice roughened. "Never complained. Not once. Not even at the end." Amelia reached across the space between their chairs and briefly touched his hand. "I'm sorry, Clayton, truly." He nodded, accepting her sympathy without breaking. "What about your John? What was he like?" Amelia's expression softened in the moonlight. "Thoughtful. Always had his nose in a book. The children get their love of stories from him. He had ideas about everything: how to improve the farm, how to teach the children, how to make the world better." A hint of sadness crept into her voice. "Sometimes I think the farming life was too practical for him. He needed more room for dreams than Nebraska dirt could provide." "You loved him," Clayton observed. "Very much," Amelia confirmed. "Even when his dreaming made life harder, even when I had to be the practical one." As November deepened toward Thanksgiving, a new tradition emerged. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, everyone would gather in the main house. Clayton would read aloud from one of Alina's books, his reading improving with practice, or Amelia would lead the children in songs. Sometimes they'd simply talk, the children sharing their discoveries from the day, Clayton explaining some aspect of ranching, or Amelia telling stories of her childhood in Ohio. These evening gatherings became the heart of their shared life, a time when the distinctions between Clayton's family and Amelia's seemed to blur. He found himself looking forward to them with an eagerness that surprised him, planning his day's work to ensure he'd be finished in time. The first snow came in early December, a gentle dusting that delighted the children but warned of the harsher weather to come. Clayton redoubled his efforts to prepare the ranch, showing Thomas and Abigail how to identify signs of the changing seasons. "Winter's coming fast this year," he told them as they mended fences one crisp afternoon. "Need to be ready." "Will it snow a lot?" Thomas asked eagerly. "Can get pretty deep up here," Clayton confirmed. "Important to keep paths clear between buildings. Animals need checking daily. Firewood needs to last." Abigail, ever practical, asked, "What else should we be doing to prepare?" Clayton glanced at her with approval. "Already doing most of it. Your ma's been putting up preserves, I've been smoking meat, got the root cellar full." He paused. "Might want to gather extra wood, though. Better to have too much than too little." That evening, as a cold wind howled outside, Clayton shared his concerns with Amelia. "Weather's turning faster than usual," he explained, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the children. "Might be in for a hard winter." Amelia nodded thoughtfully. I notice the squirrels have been especially busy, and the cattle are growing thick coats earlier than I'd expect." "You notice such things?" Clayton asked, impressed. "Farm wife for 10 years," she reminded him with a small smile. "You learn to read the signs or you don't survive." Clayton felt a surge of respect for this woman who continued to surprise him with her strength and practicality. "We should be all right. Ranch has weathered bad winters before, but might mean being snowbound for stretches." "The children will go stir-crazy," Amelia acknowledged. "But we'll manage. Perhaps you could teach Thomas more about working with wood. He's shown interest in your carpentry." "Happy to," Clayton agreed. "Abigail seems taken with Aliner's loom. Might be time to show her properly how it works." They continued planning for the winter, their heads bent together conspiratorially, unaware of how natural their partnership had become. The heavy snows began just before Christmas, transforming the ranch into a pristine white landscape that confined them largely to the buildings. True to their predictions, the children quickly grew restless with the limited space, but Amelia and Clayton had prepared. They organized activities teaching the older children checkers and chess, having the younger ones help with indoor tasks, and setting aside time each day for running and playing in the cleared yard, regardless of the temperature. Christmas itself brought a special kind of magic. Though resources were limited, Clayton and Amelia had conspired to create a meaningful celebration. Clayton had carved simple wooden toys for each child: a horse for Thomas, a doll for Lily, a set of soldiers for the twins, a miniature loom for Abigail, and a whistle for Sarah. Amelia had sewn new mittens for everyone and baked special treats using precious sugar and dried fruit she'd been saving. The children, expecting little in the way of presents, were overwhelmed with delight. They, in turn, had created gifts of their own drawings. A whittled wooden spoon Thomas had made under Clayton's guidance, and songs they performed with great ceremony. As they sat around the fire that night, bellies full of a Christmas supper that had depleted their stores more than was strictly wise, but felt necessary for morale, Clayton found himself watching Amelia. The firelight caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair and softened the worry lines that often marked her brow. She was laughing at something Lily had said, her whole face transformed by the expression. Something shifted in Clayton's chest, a loosening of the bands of grief that had constrained his heart since Aliner's death. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was beginning to care for Amelia. Not just as the mother of children he'd grown fond of, not just as a partner in managing the ranch, but as a woman. The thought both troubled and exhilarated him. Was it disloyal to Aliner's memory? Or was it the natural progression of a heart healing? Clayton had no answers, only the certainty that something fundamental had changed within him. January brought the deepest cold, days when the temperature dropped so low that breath froze in the air, and even short trips between buildings required careful bundling. The cattle huddled in the sheltered areas Clayton had prepared, their survival dependent on the hay stored in the barn and the daily attention he and Thomas devoted to them. Inside the main house, Amelia maintained a haven of warmth and activity. She'd established a schoolroom of sorts in one corner, insisting that the children's education couldn't wait for better weather. Each morning was devoted to letters, numbers, history, and geography, with Amelia drawing on John's old teaching materials she'd brought in the wagon. Clayton, observing these lessons during particularly bitter days when outside work was impossible, found himself impressed by her methods and occasionally joining in. His own formal education had been limited, and he discovered a belated enjoyment in learning alongside the children. "You'd have made a fine teacher yourself," He told Amelia one afternoon after a particularly engaging lesson about the Civil War, a subject he could contribute to firsthand. "I considered it once," she admitted, "before I met John. But opportunities for women were limited, and then marriage and children came along." "Never too late," Clayton suggested. "Denver probably needs teachers." A shadow crossed Amelia's face at the mention of Denver, a reminder of the temporary nature of their arrangement. Clayton immediately regretted bringing it up. "Perhaps," she said after a moment, "though I find I enjoy this life more than I expected to." Before Clayton could pursue this promising statement, a commotion from the yard drew their attention. Thomas burst through the door, his face red with cold and excitement. "Riders coming," he announced. "Two men on horseback." Clayton was immediately alert. Visitors in this weather could only mean trouble of some kind. "Stay here," he instructed Amelia and the children, reaching for his coat and rifle. Outside, he spotted the riders approaching slowly through the snow, their horses struggling with the depth of the drifts. As they drew closer, Clayton recognized one of them, Pete Williams, his nearest neighbor. The other was a stranger, hunched forward in his saddle as if in pain. "Pete," Clayton called as they reached the yard. "What brings you out in this weather?" The older man dismounted stiffly, his beard white with frost. "Found this fella half frozen on the trail," he explained, nodding toward his companion. "Says he's headed to Denver. Couldn't leave him out there to die, but my place is too small for another body. Thought maybe you could put him up till the weather breaks." Clayton helped the stranger dismount, noting his city clothes and the absence of proper winter gear. The man was shivering violently, his face pale with cold. "Get him inside," Clayton decided. "Amelia can see to him." Once in the warmth of the cabin, the stranger began to revive. He was a young man, perhaps 30, with the soft hands and manner of someone unaccustomed to frontier hardship. He introduced himself as Harold Finch, a lawyer from St. Louis traveling to Denver to establish a practice. "Wasn't expecting such severe weather," he explained between sips of the hot coffee Amelia provided. "Guide abandoned me when the snow got bad. Been trying to make my way alone for 2 days. Lucky Pete found you," Clayton observed. "Another night out there and we'd be burying you come spring thaw." Amelia shot him a reproving look for his bluntness, but Harold nodded in rueful agreement. "I'm indebted to both of you," he said. "I can pay for lodging, of course." "No need," Clayton replied, "though we're tight on space. Children can make room in the loft." After Pete departed, declining to stay despite the weather, Harold was settled on a pallet near the fire. The children, initially curious about the newcomer, soon returned to their activities under Amelia's direction, while Clayton watched their guest with a mixture of hospitality and caution. That night, after the household had retired, Clayton found himself unable to sleep. The presence of a stranger, especially one headed to Denver, had unsettled the careful balance they'd established. He pulled on his coat and made his way through the snow to check on the animals, needing the solitude to gather his thoughts. To his surprise, he found Amelia in the barn, checking on a pregnant cow that had been showing signs of early labor. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his breath clouding in the cold air despite the relative warmth of the barn. She shook her head. "Worried about Bessie here, and—" she hesitated. "Mr. Finch's arrival has me thinking about Denver again." Clayton felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Reminded you of your plans. Reminded me that spring will come eventually," Amelia clarified, "and decisions will need to be made." Clayton busied himself checking the cow's water trough, avoiding Amelia's gaze. "Still set on going, then?" "I don't know," she admitted, surprising him. "The children are settled here, happy. It seems cruel to uproot them again." She paused. "But I made promises to Samuel." And the opportunities in Denver. What opportunities do they need that they don't have here? Clayton asked, more sharply than he intended. Amelia's expression hardened slightly. Education, culture, the chance for Abigail and Sarah to be more than just farmers' wives. The chance for the boys to choose their paths rather than having them dictated by necessity. Plenty of educated ranchers, Clayton countered, could bring in a proper teacher come spring, build a schoolhouse if need be. And what about me, Clayton? Amelia asked quietly. What future is there for me here beyond being your housekeeper? The question hung in the frosty air between them. Clayton struggled to find the right words, aware that his answer could change everything. Could be whatever you want it to be, he finally said. You and the children. You've brought this place back to life, brought me back to life if I'm being honest. Amelia's eyes widened slightly. What are you saying, Clayton? Saying I care for you, he admitted gruffly. More than I expected to. More than I thought possible after Alina, saying I'd like you to stay. Not as a housekeeper, as what? Amelia pressed when he faltered. As my wife, if you'd consider it, Clayton finished, his heart pounding. Not right away, when it feels right, if it ever does. Amelia's expression was unreadable in the dim lantern light. This is unexpected. For me too, Clayton assured her. Wasn't looking for this, but here it is all the same. I need time, Amelia said after a long pause. Time to think, to be sure of what's best for the children, for all of us. Of course, Clayton nodded, relief and anxiety warring within him. At least she hadn't immediately rejected the idea. No rush, just wanted you to know where I stand. The cow lowed softly, drawing their attention back to the reason they'd both come to the barn in the first place. Together they checked her condition, their movements awkward now with the weight of unresolved feelings between them. She'll be fine till morning, Clayton finally pronounced. We should get some rest. They walked back to the main house in silence, the snow crunching beneath their boots. At the door, Amelia paused. Clayton, she said softly. I care for you too, that's what makes this difficult. I need to be certain my feelings aren't just gratitude or security speaking. He nodded, understanding. Take all the time you need, I'll still be here. The days that followed carried a new tension beneath the surface of their daily routines. Harold Finch remained with them, the continuing bad weather making travel impossible. He proved to be an amiable guest, entertaining the children with stories of city life and offering legal advice to Clayton regarding the ranch's paperwork, which had fallen into disarray after Alina's death. Clayton found himself both appreciative of Harold's help and irrationally resentful of his presence. The lawyer represented Denver, and all it offered the very things that might draw Amelia away from the ranch. Worse, Harold seemed particularly attentive to Amelia, complimenting her cooking, offering to help with chores, and engaging her in long conversations about books and politics that excluded Clayton with his more practical education. He seems quite taken with you, Clayton observed one afternoon when they happened to be alone in the kitchen. Amelia glanced up from the bread she was kneading. Mr. Finch is simply being polite. Seems like more than politeness to me, Clayton persisted. Way he looks at you. A hint of a smile touched Amelia's lips. Are you jealous, Clayton Barker? Just observant, he muttered, though they both knew it wasn't the whole truth. February brought a brief thaw enough to clear some of the deeper drifts and make the paths between buildings more manageable. Harold, eager to continue his journey, prepared to depart despite Clayton's warnings that the weather could turn again at any moment. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough, Harold insisted as he packed his few belongings. And I have business in Denver that won't wait. At least take the proper gear, Clayton said, providing the lawyer with extra blankets and dried provisions. Trails treacherous even in good weather. As Harold mounted his horse better rested and fed than when he'd arrived, he turned to Amelia. "Perhaps I'll see you in Denver this spring, Mrs. Everett. I'd be happy to help you get established there." Clayton tensed, watching Amelia's reaction closely. "That's kind of you, Mr. Finch," she replied diplomatically. "Safe travels." Harold tipped his hat and rode out, the children waving from the porch until he disappeared from view. "Think he'll make it?" Amelia asked quietly. "If the weather holds," Clayton replied. "Man's determined, I'll give him that." 2 days later, the thaw ended abruptly with a blizzard that howled around the ranch buildings for 3 days straight. Clayton worried briefly about Harold, but pushed the lawyer from his mind as more immediate concerns took precedence. The pregnant cow, Bessie, went into labor at the height of the storm, requiring both his and Amelia's attention through a long, difficult night that ended with a healthy calf and exhausted humans. As they trudged back to the house at dawn, the storm finally abating, Amelia stumbled with fatigue. Clayton caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him with tired eyes, "for everything, not just this." Something in her gaze made Clayton's heart skip. Without conscious thought, he bent and kissed her, a gentle, questioning touch of lips that ended almost before it began. Amelia's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't pull away. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, she reached up and touched his bearded cheek. "I've been thinking about what you said," she murmured. "About staying." Clayton held his breath, afraid to hope. And I think." She was interrupted by Abigail calling from the house, having spotted them returning. "Later," Amelia promised, squeezing his hand before hurrying toward the house where Abigail was reporting that the twins had gotten into a fight over breakfast. That later was delayed repeatedly as the day's tasks demanded attention. By evening, when they might have had a moment alone, Thomas developed a high fever that required Amelia's constant attention. For the next 2 days, the household revolved around the sick boy, with Amelia barely sleeping as she monitored his condition. When Thomas's fever finally broke, Amelia collapsed into exhausted sleep, and Clayton took over both nursing duties and household management. He discovered a new appreciation for the countless tasks Amelia handled daily, as he attempted to maintain routines for the other children while caring for Thomas and allowing Amelia to rest. By the time normalcy returned, March had arrived, bringing with it longer days and the first hints that winter's grip was loosening. The snow began to recede from the southern slopes, and the cattle grew restless in their winter pens, sensing the coming change of seasons. With spring approaching, the question of Denver loomed larger. Clayton waited for Amelia to return to their interrupted conversation, but she seemed to be deliberately avoiding the topic, filling their days with activity and retreating to the children's room each evening before they could be alone. Finally, unable to bear the suspense any longer, Clayton cornered her one afternoon as she hung laundry behind the house. "Been waiting on that later for nearly a month now," he said without preamble. Amelia's hand stilled on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line. "I know," she admitted. "I've been avoiding it." "Why?" Clayton asked, his heart sinking. "If you've decided on Denver, just say so. I'll honor my promise to see you there." "It's not that simple," Amelia replied, turning to face him. The spring breeze tugged at loose strands of her hair, and Clayton resisted the urge to brush them back from her face. "Seems simple enough to me," he said. "Either you want to stay or you don't." "Of course I want to stay," Amelia burst out, surprising him with her vehemence. "The children are happier here than they've been since before John died. You've been more than generous, more than kind." "Then what's the problem?" Clayton asked, bewildered. Amelia's expression softened. "The problem is that I'm afraid." "Of what?" Of building another life only to lose it, she said quietly. Of loving someone only to watch them die. Of putting down roots only to have them torn up again. Understanding dawned on Clayton. You're afraid of what happened with John happening again. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. And with my parents before that. The farm in Nebraska. So many losses, Clayton. I'm not sure I have the strength for more. Clayton stepped closer, tentatively taking her hands in his. Can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, he said honestly. Life out here's hard, always will be. But can promise you won't face it alone, not while I'm breathing. A tear slipped down Amelia's cheek. When Alina died, it nearly destroyed you. I saw it that first day when I arrived with the children, that hollow look. Yes, Clayton acknowledged, thought I was done for. Then you showed up with soup and 6 children in tow. A small smile touched his lips at the memory, like some kind of miracle I didn't know I needed. It wasn't a miracle, Amelia protested, just a woman with nowhere else to go. Seemed like a miracle to me, Clayton insisted. Still does. He paused, gathering his courage. Love you, Amelia. Love those children too, every last one of them. If you'll have me, want to make this real. A family. All of us together. Amelia studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. The children have already decided they want to stay, she confessed. They took a vote last week while you were out checking fence lines. Clayton chuckled, unsurprised by this news. Smart kids. Yes, they are, Amelia agreed, and they've come to care for you deeply. Especially Thomas and the twins. You've given them something they've been missing. And what about their mother? Clayton asked softly. What has she decided? Instead of answering with words, Amelia rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Clayton pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist as her hands came to rest on his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Amelia smiled up at him. Does that answer your question, Clayton Barker? Think I might need you to explain it one more time, he teased, earning a laugh that warmed him more thoroughly than any summer sun could have. Their second kiss was interrupted by a chorus of giggles. They turned to find all 6 children watching from around the corner of the house, expressions ranging from Abigail's knowing smile to Lily's wide-eyed curiosity. Does this mean we're staying? Thomas asked hopefully. Amelia looked to Clayton, who nodded. Yes, she confirmed. We're staying. The children erupted in cheers, rushing forward to surround them in a group embrace that nearly knocked Clayton off his feet. He found himself laughing, truly laughing for the first time in longer than he could remember, as he steadied himself with one arm around Amelia and the other corralling as many children as he could reach. That evening, they gathered the children for a family meeting to discuss the future. Clayton outlined his plans for the ranch, expanding the house to accommodate everyone properly, adding a dedicated schoolroom, perhaps bringing in a teacher from Laramie for formal lessons. And what about Denver? Sarah asked, the only child who seemed uncertain about the change in plans. Uncle Samuel is expecting us. I'll write to him, Amelia promised. Explain everything. Perhaps he can visit us here instead. And what about? Abigail hesitated, glancing between Clayton and her mother. Are you going to get married? Clayton and Amelia exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Yes, Clayton answered finally. If your mother will have me and if you children approve. Of course we approve, Thomas exclaimed. We already decided that too, Amelia raised an eyebrow. Did you now? And when was this decision made? Right after we voted to stay, David admitted. We thought you might need some help figuring things out. Clayton burst into laughter, joined quickly by Amelia. Well, I'm glad that's settled then, he said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. The spring thaw accelerated in the following weeks, transforming the landscape from white to brown to the first tender green of new growth. The cattle were released from their winter confinement to graze on fresh grass, and Clayton and Thomas began the process of inspecting and repairing the damage winter had wrought on the ranch's infrastructure. Amelia and Abigail planted a larger garden than the ranch had seen in years, with ambitious plans for preserving enough food to see them through the next winter with greater comfort. The younger children helped where they could and played in the warming sunshine, their laughter a constant backdrop to the day's work. In late April, a letter arrived from Denver, a response from Samuel to Amelia's news. She read it privately first, then shared it with Clayton that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "He's happy for us," she reported. "Says he suspected something like this might happen when I wrote about the winter we've spent here." "Smart man," Clayton observed. "Yes," Amelia agreed. "He also says he plans to visit in June after the spring rush at his store settles down, wants to meet the man who's stolen his sister away." Clayton chuckled. "Looking forward to it." "There's more," Amelia added, her expression growing more serious. "He mentioned that Harold Finch arrived in Denver last month." Clayton frowned. "Good for him, made it after all." "Yes, but he's been asking about me," Amelia continued. "Apparently he told Samuel he developed feelings during his stay with us. Did he now?" Clayton's voice held a dangerous edge. Amelia laid a calming hand on his arm. "Samuel set him straight, told him I was spoken for, but I thought you should know." Clayton relaxed slightly. "Suppose I can't blame the man for having good taste," he conceded grudgingly. Amelia smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "There's something else Samuel mentioned. The school in Denver is seeking teachers. He thought I might be interested." Clayton tensed, looking down at her. "Thought we settled this." "We did," Amelia assured him. "I'm not going anywhere." "But it gave me an idea. What if we started a school here, not just for our children, but for others in the area? Pete Williams has grandchildren who visit in the summers. The Harrison family 15 miles south has 5 children with no formal education. We could convert the old storage barn, hire a proper teacher eventually." Clayton considered the idea. "Would take work, money too." "Yes," Amelia acknowledged, "but it would be worth it, and it would give me a purpose beyond the house and garden. I could teach, at least until we find someone more qualified." "You're plenty qualified," Clayton assured her. "But if it's what you want, we'll make it happen." The wedding took place on the first day of June, a perfect Wyoming spring day with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Judge Parker rode out from Laramie to perform the ceremony, bringing with him a small delegation from town, including the general store owner and his wife, who had been friends with Eleanor. Samuel arrived from Denver 2 days before, bringing gifts for the children and a wedding present for the couple, a finely crafted grandfather clock that required both Clayton and Thomas to carry it into the house. He proved to be a jovial man with Amelia's gray eyes and a merchant's gift for conversation, immediately winning over the children with stories of Denver and pockets full of candy. The ceremony itself was simple but meaningful, held in the yard with the mountains as a backdrop. Abigail stood as Amelia's maid of honor, while Thomas served as Clayton's best man. The younger children scattered wildflowers along the path and giggled throughout the brief service, but their excitement only added to the joyful atmosphere. When Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton kissed Amelia with a tenderness that belied the passion they'd discovered in each other over the past months. The small gathering of guests cheered, none more enthusiastically than the children who were now officially a family. The celebration continued into the evening with food, music from Pete's fiddle, and dancing under the stars. As the night deepened, Clayton found a moment alone with Amelia, drawing her away from the festivities to the quiet of the porch. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Very," she assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Though I keep thinking about that day, the day we met, if I hadn't stopped here. Or if I'd sent you on your way," Clayton added. "Or if I hadn't made that rabbit soup the night before," Amelia continued with a smile. Clayton chuckled. "Fate works in strange ways. Do you believe in fate?" she asked curiously. Clayton considered the question. "Not sure. Believed in very little after Alina died, just getting through each day." He paused. "But you showing up like you did right when you did makes a man wonder." "I was just a widow with 6 children and nowhere else to go," Amelia reminded him. "And I was just a widower with too much land and too much grief," Clayton countered. "Yet here we are." "Here we are," Amelia echoed, turning in his arms to face him. In the moonlight, her eyes shimmered with emotion. "I never expected to love again after John, never wanted to risk that pain." "Know the feeling," Clayton acknowledged. "But I'm glad I did," she continued. "Glad I stopped here that morning. Glad I had soup to offer a grieving man." Clayton bent to kiss her, pouring all his feelings into the gesture. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Reckon that was the best soup I ever tasted," he murmured. "Changed everything." From the yard came the sound of laughter as Samuel swung little Lily in a circle, her delight carrying clearly through the night air. The other children danced around them, their faces alight with joy. "Our family," Amelia said softly, following Clayton's gaze. "Our family," he agreed, the words filling him with a contentment he'd never thought to feel again after standing over Alina's grave that dawn 7 months ago. As they rejoined the celebration, Clayton reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The grief that had nearly consumed him, the unexpected arrival that had saved him, and the love that had grown slowly but surely through a Wyoming winter. Some might call it coincidence, others fate. Clayton was simply grateful for the second chance. He'd been given the chance to build a new life with Amelia and the children who had come to mean everything to him. In the years that followed, the Barker Ranch flourished. The school Amelia envisioned became a reality, serving children from miles around. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, which increased by 2 more children, a son born the following spring and a daughter 2 years later. The original 6 children thrived under Clayton's guidance and Amelia's nurturing care, each finding their own path as they matured. Life on the frontier remained challenging, with droughts, harsh winters, and occasional conflicts testing their resilience. But through it all, Clayton and Amelia faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing season. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and they had a moment alone, they would sometimes speak of that first meeting of grief and soup, of 6 children and a fresh grave, of endings that became beginnings, and of the extraordinary journey that had brought them home to each other.